Welcome to the 2022 Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, our 35th anniversary, presented by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. You're about to learn from some of the top saltwater anglers in the country. Now, the key to getting the most from the seminar series is to listen to the little subtleties, the adjustments that we are doing when the fishing is tough. This is what we like to refer to as the golden nuggets of the seminar series. We're about ready to get underway, so let's get right down to it.
Coming to you from the IGFA in South Florida, it's the 35th Annual Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Now, here's George Poveromo.
Welcome to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, presented by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats and filmed on location at the International Game Fish Association. We're going to combine this panel, snook and redfish, and we've got quite the diverse group here based on locations. We have Captain Jim Willcox from Islamorada in the Florida Keys, running out of Bud and Mary's Marina. From the Tampa Bay area, and I fished with him before, he is absolutely murderous when it comes to catching redfish and snook in the Tampa Bay complex, Captain Mike Goodwine. And sitting next to me, Ashley Weber from the Rockledge, Mosquito Lagoon area. All right, all three of you are pros at getting snook and redfish. And I'm gonna combine this for a couple reasons, because I want to show this contrast in environments. Even though you get them in the same areas, Jim, I'm throwing the ball to you. You do a lot of the backcountry fishing behind Islamorada. Sometimes you're running way out into the Gulf section as well. Determining the shoreline and looking at a shoreline, which is going to dictate this stretch of shoreline might be better for snook versus redfish? What could you tell me about maybe the way the mangroves lay or channels?
Well,
or what?
snook versus redfish, they both like cover. I mean, the interesting thing is we catch them on trees, tight to cover. The higher the tide, the tighter they are to the cover. And we also catch them out in the great wide open. We catch them out, like we did on the show, out in the open, on structure out there, or just roaming the flats. You know, a lot of times we'll get somebody, they'll come down and say, well, we want to catch snook, but we don't want to catch redfish. Well, then I got to apologize, Mike. I tell them I'm really sorry, because while we're trying to catch snook, we're going to catch some redfish by mistake, because they live in the same place.
Yeah, and that's true on all my charters, all of them. I am me personally inside, I'm fishing for a redfish. But we'll be snook fishing or trout fishing the whole time. I'm trying to catch a redfish deep down inside. So, and then the snook and, trout, they just keep the rods bent until we get a redfish. But my goal is a redfish. And because it's the same, they live together. If it's snook there, it's redfish there, redfish, snook.
But can you determine what might be a better section of shoreline by maybe being out there in the low tide and seeing what cuts in deeper? Or does this one mangrove area drop down sharper versus another one that's more of a gradual descend versus, is there any studies that you could do on a low tide that might determine maybe some of these better areas to catch these fish? I'll throw that to you, Ashley, and then we'll go back over to Mike.
So where I live in Mosquito Lagoon, Upper IRL, it's not very tidal, but there's more of a population of redfish than snook, definitely. Over the last year or so, there's been more snook that have been showing up in the Mosquito Lagoon. But when we're fishing, we're primarily seeing redfish. So if we really want to catch snook, we'll head a little bit farther south, farther south of the Indian River. But in the Mosquito Lagoon, if you are targeting snook particularly, we're definitely fishing the deeper edges. Like when sight fishing for redfish in the Mosquito Lagoon, there used to be grass. There's not grass there anymore. So they're mostly in the shallower, sandy areas, and you're seeing them. But the snook that we catch are mostly more on blind casts in the deeper edges of the mangroves.
Okay, is there any particular maybe shoreline type structures, be it docks or whatever, that might tend to hold more redfish versus snook in your part of the world up there? Or?
When you are really trying to target a bigger snook, we do have, the Ponce Inlet up in New Smyrna Beach and the Sebastian Inlet down in, it's Sebastian and Melbourne Beach. And I think that, the snook seem to hang out closer towards the inlets, especially farther south in the Sebastian Inlet. And it's really, I've had the most success fishing the top of an outgoing tide, in the areas that are a little bit more tidal in the backcountry, closer to the Sebastian Inlet and through that area. So I think that, fishing the points, like mangrove, if you can figure out where it's really moving on a deep edge of like an island down there, or, when you're cutting into a cove, those,
And it still has a decent
points
water
can
flow
be
in there,
really
sure.
good, good bite.
Absolutely. We're going to run to a commercial break right now, come right back. You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA. We're going to run a couple commercials and return to our panel.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by SIMRAD. Go with SIMRAD and go with confidence. Penn, let the battle begin. Sirius XM Marine, weather, fish mapping, and entertainment for anglers. Mercury Outboards, go boldly. Angle, portable fridge freezers and high-performance coolers. George will be right back. Welcome back to the 35th Annual Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series. The topic, snook and redfish. And Mike, I want to come over to you too. We were discussing the types of areas, someone who may not be that familiar with a zone. Is there anything that's going to stand out where snook may be in relation to redfish? Or
You have to learn the bottom first. And a lot of people don't like to go out when the water is real low, but that is the best time to go if you want to figure out your
and
area.
that's to see what the bottom, if there's any potholes or any depressions where these fish might gather in the high tide. Is that why?
Yeah, you're figuring out where the oyster bar is at, where the sand holes at, the grass shows, everything. I mean, we have negative tides when everything is out of the water. And you can see where the ponds, the water drop down, and you'll have a pond of water on the inside, and you know those fish is gonna hold on the inside. They can't get out of there. So that's where it comes in, the people with the small skiffs or kayaks or whatever could get in there. So don't just wait to go when the water is high. Go on negative tides and learn it.
I couldn't agree with Mike more. You have to go at low tide to learn it. You not only learn where to go, you learn where not to go. Yeah, totally.
And a lot of that by trial and error, I'm sure.
Yeah, but you got to go at low tide. I've told people that forever. That's like, it's a basic thing, and he's got it nailed.
All
To
right.
learn a spot, you got to be there at low tide.
Well, let's look at Florida Keys. People want to maybe say target snook during the winter months. Traditionally, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the inshore guy here. Don't the snook populations in the wintertime, as it gets colder, go more inland, and then as they progress to the inlets for spawning during the summer
Well, they'll
months?
go inland, but then we get a cold front like we're going to get tonight or tomorrow night. Those fish will bail out of that 2-foot water, and then you want to be at the exit ramp. There's certain places they come in and out of these areas, and you want to be sitting there.
And when they do come out, is there
Then
any
they
place
pile
they
up
hold?
in deep water.
Okay.
Some of my favorite fishing is wintertime, the lowest tide possible, because there's a whole lot of places they can't be.
Yeah, and in Tampa, it's kind of the opposite. All the snook will go to the farthest bite country they could get.
Because it's a warmer...
Well, it's muddier back there.
Right.
And that the sun will get in that
Warm
mud
up quicker.
and it warms the water up quicker. So...
Well, you look at some of the snooking down in our part of the world of South Florida, when those real rare cold days we get, that one day of the year it goes to 78 degrees, is some of the best fishing. Based on what you said, Mike, you find some of these docks where they have these larger boats, the water is somewhat shallow, more of a muddy type bottom, because that seems all we have now in our area anymore. Those grasses are gone. But if there's a large enough boat, and when it backs in and out of that lift and comes up, there's a depression under there from the drives and the props. And sometimes on real cold days, they'll get under there and
like
lay
getting in a
there.
pothole on the front.
Right,
It's getting
because
in
of
a
the heat
6-foot
too of the
pothole.
mud.
Yeah.
And you could flip, get a good shot. You could get under that boat in that hoist and drop down in the holes. You get some
I got
good
another
fish.
tip for your everyday guy that comes down here fishing in his own boat too, and I equate it to freshwater. And the snook are I tell them they're like a trout behind a rock. That's like, think if you're coming from wherever and you've been trout fishing, they like a little backwater. They want to sit on the edge of the current and ambush.
Yep.
Most of the time, they're not going to be out in the ripping current unless it's warm,
Ashley, as far as your best way to target, say, redfish, what would that be?
I personally think that the most fun way to do it for me if you're in the Mosquito Lagoon is, we pull around some people, trolling motor or get really as skinny as you can up in there. And once you can see them, I usually throw a fly, but if you have somebody, that wants to throw a bait, just like a live shrimp on a little 1/0 hook,
Right.
And 25 pound, 20 pound leader, and just sight fishing them, just like
Now,
just
on the
pulling
sight fish, I want to
shorelines.
quiz you on this too. Okay, you're in a position and you see the redfish. I mean, obviously, it's a big school. Just get anywhere near the front of them, they're going to eat. But what if you've seen a single or a double with the redfish? Is it important to get on their nose? Or do you lead the fish and bring it back in? I want you to hold the thought. We're going to go commercial
Okay.
break, and I'm going to have you answer that. You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA. We're going to come right back after a few commercials.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by Rapala, your best shot at a world record. Suffix, always use the best line. VNC, your expert in hooks. Williamson Lures for the pelagic playground. Starbrite, blending technology with performance since 1973. George will be right back. Welcome back to the 35th Annual Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
We're back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, filmed on location at the IGFA, and we're dealing with snook and redfish. And Ashley, you and I have a conversation now. I fished the Mosquito River Lagoon before, and I've seen those big schools of red. You just got to get anywhere near them. But I've also been there in times where you've seen a single fish or maybe a double. How accurate a cast do you have to have it for redfish? Do you lead them? Give a little insight on that.
So when you're really hunting for them, in the sandier areas and you're sight fishing them, I like to usually lead them by 2 or 3 feet in front of them, and you really want to wait until they're in the zone to either pop it or make a movement. With a shrimp, it's a little bit different. You really want to free line it and watch what's going on. And I think that leading them off by it really depends on how. Sometimes it's how long of a reaction time you have. Sometimes you'll see them, tailing or, belly crawling with their back out of the water for a while, so you can really get set up on a better shot that way. But sometimes, you're hunting, you're looking, and especially with the water conditions now, it's a little murkier. You won't see them until they're 10 feet from you. So when you've got them 10 feet from you, I think that the most important thing is to just not get your line crossed across their back. You want to make sure you're in a position to get a cast in front of them, and then let it sit until they're right in the zone. And if you're using an artificial, you want to pop it right in their face, basically, to get a reaction eat. But if it's a shrimp, you want it to just be in their zone as they're about to pass.
Get you a big old nasty piece of cut mullet and throw it 20 or 30 feet from it, and you can lead that fish from the smell. He's
Absolutely.
Sit bite, grab you something to drink, and just wait, and you'll catch your redfish. All that leading.
On that very same topic, Jim, you and I fished together, and we shifted gears out of the snook into the redfish. And it was more just frozen shrimp tipped on jigs for the scent factor.
Yeah, because we were fishing structure where it's impossible to throw an artificial,
Right.
So that's why we had to go to shrimp that time.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, hear Ashley talk about some of these redfish, and if you're fortunate enough to get them in open water, makes casting life a little bit easier. But where Mike's from and where you fish, you're living dangerously. You've got to get, whether it's a live bait or a bucktail or that lure, way into the fringes of mangroves, have a shot at a lot of these fish. So either one of you two gentlemen can elaborate on this.
Well, I agree with Mike. You need the stinky stuff when you get in those tight situations. But when we fish together, we get them out in the open on a flat in a school of mullet. We find the reds with mullet a lot. If you find a mullet moving, there's redfish in there. And then you're just firing away. You don't have to be so precise.
I see guys, they'll step on my boat, and they'll have on the glasses and the little
look good,
shirt.
really
They
not.
look like they could fish. I handle rods like, all right, they'll go to school of redfish cast, and they'll do a Peter Pan throw. It'll go like 10 feet. And I'm like, no, you got to debo it, dude. Just, pretend that this big piece of chunk bait is something that you want away from you. An ex-boss, ex-wife, something. And just sling it. And you want to get it far as you can out there. And then don't move it. Don't move it. You want it to sit still as you could get. And that's when I slam it in the rod holder, or I have them pull a lot of line out. You know, most people, it's kind of opposite to what we've been taught. People sitting there and they got the line tight and they keep bumping it. And sometimes those fish, I've seen them, they'll come up to the bait and you move it, they'll back away. You know, they like to sneak up on it and eat it. So
First time they saw a dead bait move.
yeah, I was like, dude, where's this bait moving? So I have them keep a bunch of line laid on the water. And they're like, how am I gonna know when the fish get on there? I said, when the line get tight, you got to fish. That's just it.
And that, based on what you're saying too, with a lot of excess slack in there, that chunk bait's going to pretty much do what that tide may do to roll or whatever looks more natural coming through there.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of natural, it's natural that we go to commercial break right now, but we'll circle right back into our Snook and Redfish panel. You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series. We're coming right back after a few commercials.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by Columbia Sportswear. Stay cool and protected while fishing. JL Audio, ahead of the curve. ACR, building survival products since 1956. Florida Keys and Key West. Visit FLAKeys.com. George will be right back. Welcome back to the 35th Annual Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
We're back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA. Snook and Redfish, a combo panel. I think, and I know it may sound bad saying this, but we give these fish maybe a little more credit than they deserve. You know, I think we definitely overcompensate for them. I remember as a kid growing up, a cousin of my neighbor's used to go down to this one canal, Brackish Canal, in Miami's Biscayne Bay, when the mullet were moving through, and he would snag some fresh mullet. He would cut a half a mullet or a chunk of mullet. He would take a Penn 4-aught with 50-pound mono, tie a big egg sinker, and then put the swivel and use a number 7 or 8 single-strand wire leader and a big, it looked like about a 5/6-aught hook that we wouldn't even use for wreck fishing or grouper. He'd take a chunk of that fresh mullet and just flip that out there and put the rod in a rod holder with the clicker and a drag backed off. And he would do 2 or 3 rods. And this gentleman banged more snook in that 30-pound class than you could imagine. And he's in wire leader, and I even asked him, why wire leader? He says, it's tannic water here. When that metallic leader, which is brown, lays down there, it blends in, but you have to have that fresh mullet when it's coming through. You go to a tackle shop and try to buy it, you won't even get a bite.
Snook and redfish eat off the bottom. They both like nasty baits on the bottom, and we give them too much credit, and they bottom feeders. And, you know, just anybody who's been fishing for redfish, they catch catfish while they're doing it. If you don't catch a catfish when you're redfishing, you're doing something wrong. Did you know a catfish is the first cousin to a redfish?
No, I didn't know that.
I'm just made that up. It sounded good.
That's why artificials are good sometimes. You don't catch the catfish.
Yeah. Jim, that hold true somewhat in your
Well, that's why we fish artificials a lot,
Yes.
because you miss the catfish, you know what I
Yes.
mean? You don't get the catfish.
Absolutely. If you had to narrow it down, maybe, Jim, for your snook and redfish to maybe 1, 2, or maybe 3 crucial points that somebody could hear and maybe help them become a better angler chasing snook or redfish in your part of the world, what would that be?
Timing.
Meaning?
Timing. Well, I mean, you could be at the right place at the wrong time. You got to figure out how to be at the right place at the right time. And you got to try and fish for fish that are actively feeding. It's a lot easier than force feeding them.
All right. Mike, I'm going to come back to you with the same question I'm going to ask Ashley. Give me 1 or 2 of maybe Mike Goodwine's key points where somebody could catch more snook and more redfish.
Put the rod in the rod holder, grab you a drink, some poppers, something, and just chill out. You got to be patient. That's just it. I've seen people sitting on the right spot, and they're there too early, or they set up wrong, and they leave. Now ease in, be right at the right time, and catch fish. So you just got to be patient, chill out, and wait.
Mike, I got to ask you a question. Do you know why I'm not a doctor?
A what?
Do you know why I'm not a doctor?
Why is that?
I don't have any patience.
Oh, okay.
Ashley, question to you, if you had to boil it down, maybe 1 or 2 key points in your part of the world for somebody to score more on the redfish, what would that be?
What I do is a little bit different, a lot of it different in targeting these fish
Sure.
than some of these guys do. It's more of a hunting game.
Yep.
So I think that it's just, and everybody always says it, but just time on the water, like you can fish an area, 3 or 4
Right.
times, and you really need to figure out like what zones hold the most fish, and it's just time on the water. I think.
And I got to back you up that it's an endless study, and you get some shortcuts in it, but it's all about burning gas and making yourself available to learn these fish habitats. I want to thank our panel of experts for the Snook Redfish Combo Panel. You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, filmed on location at the International Game Fish Association. Well, there you have it. This week's Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series presented by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Now, adhering to Seminar Series tradition, you still have an opportunity for a chance to maybe win one of the many door prizes we have available. Go to nationalseminarseries.com, log on to the door prize banner, and enter your name and contact information. At the conclusion of the seminar series, we will computer generate the winners of those prizes. So get right down to it.